Neiman. Jeff is an alumnus of the University of Michigan and is now a data scientist with the Ford Motor Company. Jeff is going to talk to us about data storytelling and how it is changing the way decisions are being made in the industry. Storytelling through data is slated to be one of the most demanded skills by recruiters in the coming decade. And I'm sure a lot of us would be eager to know how to become a data storyteller. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us. And we are really excited to have you today. We also have with us Professor Giridhar Ramachandran, who is the faculty mentor of DARVIX and continues to be a pillar of support for the team. Sir will be the facilitator for the session. Thank you, sir, for joining us. I'll request you to now please take over from here for commencing the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jeff. So I'll introduce Jeff very shortly in a short way, and there's a lot of stories that he's going to share with you anyway later. So Jeff and I go back to our time in sport, and Jeff, other than he comes to Ford with a lot of experience in project management, IT, and data. But what's very important that I wanted to share related to what we have today is he runs a hugely successful session in a boot camp of data scientists that we had Ford. So at Ford, when data scientists join, there is over time they attend a boot camp for a few days, during which they get to go through a drill on many things, including data storytelling. And Jeff's session is probably the most popular one in that. And so he's been my mentor when I tried to replicate that in India. And so I'm really happy that he's here to share with us his experiences and what he can and his knowledge of the subject. Thanks, Jeff. Over to you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Giri, my friend. Giri is very dear to me. He every time I would come to Chennai, and I would go there quite often, he would arrange on our last day, it was a tradition, for us to eat the best biryani on the planet. I mean, it was amazing. I don't know where he got it. He said there was some old lady that made this stuff that he knew, but it was remarkable. And so I credit Giri to introducing me to the world of biryani. So Giri has many ways been my Indian mentor in terms of all things related to great Indian culture and cuisine. So thank you, Giri. And when he called me the other night, I said, for you, I will do this. No problem. So it's a pleasure to be with you all. Let me share my screen here. All right. And we'll start with this here. And we will share. So, okay. We got that. Here we go from the beginning. So, one of the things that is true to me is that I am a little bit older than most of you. And I went to school in Germany. I went to school at a time where it was surrounded by a wall in a town, and I went to school in West Berlin. So I actually lived a couple of kilometers from the wall. And it's just like it was in the movies. If you've seen any movies like Bridge of Spies or any other spy movie about West and East Berlin, there was a big wall surrounded by guards and gates and everywhere. And when you would go into the east, you would it was very intimidating. There were guards everywhere. There were you would drive your car up to the border. They would put mirrors underneath your car to see if you were bringing in anything under there. They would put sticks in your gas tanks to make sure that you weren't smuggling in anything that way. They would interrogate you, ask questions, and then they would wave you on your way after they stamped your visa 3 times because they were Germans. And so one day, while we were camping in the east, I took a wrong turn. And I'm old enough to admit it now that I took a wrong turn. I knew I took a wrong turn when I came to a place where there was razor wire on both sides of the street, and I was surrounded by soldiers with machine guns and dogs with them. And so I turned to them and I said, "Es tut mir leid, wir haben uns verirrt. I'm sorry, we are lost." And then I said what I thought would be the great excuse of anything: "Wir sind Amerikaner. We are American." And they go, oh, Americana. Okay, no problem. And they said, ask for our passports. And so I was traveling with my wife and some friends, and I turned to everyone in the car and I said, we're in a restricted harbor. I took a wrong turn. I need your passport. And so everybody gives me their passports except for my friend Greg. And Greg looks at me and goes, Jeff, I don't know how to tell you this, but I think I left my passport back in the tent. And so I turned to the guard, I handed him the passports, and I said to him, you know, I think my friend here, he can't find his passport. And all of a sudden, the guard, who was very friendly with me, got very formal and very stiff and said, "Eski problema," which means there are problems. And I literally said this, problems? For whom? And he said, for him and for you. And I asked this question, why me? And he said, weil Sie der Einzige, der Deutsch können, because you're the only one who speaks German. And I said, great, I know what the next chapter is going to be. I'm about to meet the Staatssicherheitsdienst, the Stasi, the East German KGB. They want to know why these group of Americans are traveling and are in a restricted harbor with no passports. And so at that point, I realized that I was in trouble and I needed to learn and focus on communication. Now, it's interesting to note the reaction of everyone in my car. My friend Greg, he's in the back of our trunk, our boot, rifling through his stuff to see if he could, by some miracle, find his passport. My wife, she is sitting next to me, not moving whatsoever. My friend Linda, she's in the back and she goes, we need to pray. I said, that's a great idea. You get on that. Me, I'm going through my English-German dictionary and looking up phrases for my interrogation because I realized the most important thing I needed to be able to do at that time is communicate. Gary already introduced me, so I'll skip most of this. The one thing he didn't mention is I actually serve as adjunct faculty in data science at two universities in New York, at CUNY, at City University of New York, and at Yeshiva. And I do lead a team of data scientists at Ford Motor Company. And so when you think about communication, there are many things that make it quite challenging. For example, when you think about it, there are languages. Now, I imagine a good number of you speak another language besides English, whether it's Hindi, whether it's Tamil, whether it's Marathi, or some other language. You speak more than one language, and languages can make it incredibly difficult. Nonverbal communication can make communication difficult. You know, signs, things like this or waving or whatever, facial expressions. Companies also have different languages and ways they communicate. But here's the problem that we face in the world of data and analytics. You see, we're a lot like Sherlock Holmes. We see all the mysteries. We learn, we have to challenge and solve problems with data. And when we do that, we dig in deep and we learn so many different insights. The problem is that when I explain to leadership, to my boss, to my customers what I've solved, we explain all these fancy calculus problems and high-level statistics, and we talk about hypothesis testing and different kinds of model building like XGBoost and linear regression or whatever, clustering, and we talk about our k-nearest neighbor and how many Ks we've chosen and so on. But instead, what they really need to see is here on the bottom. Now, the challenge that we have, and one of the best ways we've found to solve it, is by helping our data scientists learn how to communicate through story. Now, let me tell you about two very famous physicists. You've heard of these, I'm sure, from your days in high school or wherever. Albert Einstein, Nobel Prize-winning physicist. Niels Bohr also won a Nobel Prize. They were contemporaries, both from the 20th century. Both grew up in Europe right before the Second World War. Both fled Europe because of Nazi Germany. Both were equally brilliant. Both won Nobel Prizes, as I mentioned. Einstein, not for relativity, but for something else. Niels Bohr, he's the one that invented the whole Bohr model of the molecule of the atom, with the nucleus with the proton and the neutron and the electron spinning around like planets. Well, Einstein was a renowned storyteller. In fact, I have his book on my shelf here at home called Relativity, and it allows, it's very simply written. It uses a lot of story, a lot of analogy. One time Einstein went on a worldwide tour to talk about theoretical physicists. His presentations were 4 hours long. And he thought about it. He said, you know what? This is too much. I'm going too long at 4 hours. I'm going to shrink it to 2.5 hours. So he gets to Japan, and he stops after 2.5 hours, and the audience erupts in protest. Dr. Einstein, they said, please continue. We want more information about this theoretical physics of what you were doing. Now, on the other hand, Niels Bohr was one of these guys who there are no details that were insignificant to him. He would share everything. He went on at about the same time a tour, also talking about his views of theoretical physics. He started in Northeast U.S. and on university campuses. Initially, these auditoriums were filled, but then the word got out that Niels Bohr was kind of boring. And so by the time he was halfway through, you could barely fill half an auditorium to hear this renowned physicist speak. One day, Niels Bohr was summoned into Winston Churchill's office, the Prime Minister of the UK, and he was trying to explain to Churchill about nuclear proliferation. Finally, Churchill, in frustration, threw Niels Bohr out of his office and said, "Don't come back here till you have the ability to communicate to me what you're trying to say." You see, Einstein, everyone wanted to listen to because of his ability to take complicated ideas and communicate them simply. Bohr, on the other hand, had the opposite effect. So when you think about story focuses on, facts. The difference between facts and stories. When I tell you a fact, I say, fact, the capital of Michigan is Lansing. Well, that fact goes into your mind. It's something that you have to prove. It reminds you of work, and I'm sure in the next day will be easily forgotten by all of you since none of you live in Michigan. But if I told you a story, a story engages the soul. It helps you to, it persuades you, it reminds you of life, and it becomes memorable. And they've done a lot of research recently about what stories do to our brains. Dr. Paul Zak of the Claremont School of Medicine in California did a story where he got permission to take two different groups, a control group and another group. And what they would do is they got permission to put brain scans on their brains. And these two groups were each shown a video, but with a man and his son. In the first group, it was a very factual-based presentation. It was about a man and his son going to the zoo. Here's the man and his son looking at the elephants. Here's the man and his son looking at the zebras. Here's the man and his son looking at the kangaroos. And what they discovered was, initially, the front part of the brain lit up. This is the part of the brain which secretes cortisol, which initially focuses your attention, but then fades very quickly. In the second group, this group of people saw the same man and his son, but this time he told a story. And what the man said was, I have difficulty playing with my son right now. And you see the boy playing off in the background. And he said, the reason why I'm having difficulty is today my son was diagnosed with cancer. And we found out the doctor said he has 6 months to live. He said, I so desperately want to enjoy every last moment with my son, but unfortunately, I can't because I'm just plain too sad. What they discovered was when they told a story and not a fact-based presentation, to their surprise, the back part of the brain lit up. This is the area that secretes oxytocin, where empathy and connection are made available. It's interesting. The National Institute of Health in the States a couple years ago also did a study. And what they did was they took, let's say I was telling a story to Giri, and they put our brain scan on both of us. And what they discovered is within about 2 to 3 seconds, as Giri engaged with my story, his brain scan would begin to mirror mine. And so what they've discovered is that the way human beings are created, they just are wired through story. The chemistry of their brains change versus just giving numbers and facts. Now, if you think about it, why story? Well, there are lots of things that go on through history. This on the top left, that's from 9/11, a very tragic day in our country, where for a time, and probably the last time in my country's history, our nation united because our president told a story of the brave first responders. The one on the bottom left, everybody knows that story. That's Martin Luther King telling his I Have a Dream speech. Now, he could have given numbers and statistics, but instead he painted a picture of what America would look like if what mattered most was the dream, where what mattered not was the color of your skin, but the content of your character. On the top right, that's the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I had friends that were there that day. I could tell you a story of complex ideology between communism and capitalism, between democracy and totalitarianism, or I could just tell you the story of a people made free. You guys know who the bottom right is. And I remember after my first trip to India, I rewatched the movie Gandhi, which I know had Ben Kingsley starring in, and not one of the many famous Bollywood or Tollywood actors. But nevertheless, what struck me about that was before Gandhi felt he could rally the people to independence, he went on a tour where he told his story and his vision of what a free India could and should look like. In my own state, Michigan, there are places, a petroglyph, a place where a rock where the Native Americans would meet to tell stories. And my point in the slide is, since the beginning of time, humanity has always communicated big ideas through stories. The irony is the data scientists are finally catching on to what every child and every culture has always known. Think about your own culture in India. It is a great part of your history and your culture, the ideas of stories. Stories and epics like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata are a great part, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the third one, but are the epics that are part of your history and your culture that are an incredibly memorable way to transmit ideas and values throughout history in India. And so, I'm often asked, well, Jeff, I lead a boring life. Where do I find stories? And I think about this because stories are everywhere. My boys love to run track and field. And my twin boys, run the 400-meter race. And if you think about it, it's a very exciting race. It's one exhausting track around, the entire stadium. And so in this one day, they were in a regional championship. And one of their, and the last thing in the state of Michigan in a regional championship is the 4x400 meter relay. And this is where 4 of your best runners go and hand off the baton each to itself. And in most really tough races and contests, it determines the winner. And so one day they were at the regional championship, and one of the runners had gotten hurt during the long jump. And the coach did the math and realized that they already won the regional championship. And so he told this kid that he didn't need to run. He said, "You look hurt. Don't worry about it. We've already won. We'll run somebody else." He goes, "No, coach, absolutely not. I'm running this race." He goes, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Because, you're hurt." And he goes, "No." And so, okay, coach says, and so he says, "You can run the race." And so my son, Justin, was the opener. He ran first because he hated to lose. And then the way it works is you have an exchange zone where you can take the baton and you pass it to that person in that little zone. And so in the race, the one who goes first gets in the blocks and stagger starts out around. And then the first handoff, the person sets up behind him. And he literally had to have two of his friends help carry him out to the exchange zone. And so the gun went off, my son went around, and he hands off the baton, and sure enough, they're in first place. This kid, he hands off the baton to this kid, Brendan, and he's running with all he can. You could tell he's hurt, but he's running with all of his heart, and he falls back down to third place. And then the next two runners come, and they end up finishing in second place in the region. At the end of the meet, his parents take this kid to the hospital, and they have him x-rayed, and it turns out he ran the entire race on a broken leg. And as parents, we sit there and we said, why? Why did you run on a broken leg? And Brandon just sat and looked, and he pointed at the other three runners. He said, I did it for them. Because I knew that not only we already were going to team state championship, but I also knew that the top two relays in every event, in every region, go to the individual state championships. And I knew that even hurt, I could run faster than our next runner, who would be 4 seconds slower than me. And I figured even hurt, I could get us in the top two. They may never have a chance again to go to this state championship, and I wanted them to have it. And so I ran on a broken leg. And I sit there and I go, wow. I could use this story to explain a number of things. The bravery of the love of team, all these things, stupidity of youth. But the reality is simply this. I'm often asked, well, where do you find a story? I just watched what my kids did. You see, there are stories all around us. You know, all of us have things that happen that are interesting. We just have to look for them. Like the boy who answered the 3, 4, 5 triangle question there. By next, it's right there. Now, I'm often asked, well, how do I do this in a data storytelling context, as Giddy said? And this is what I do. First, I identify what is the point of what I'm trying to say, the basic need, the message. And then I identify what the point I'm trying to tell in a story. I brainstorm to find a match, and then I pick it for a presentation. Like, for example, one time I had to talk at work about this issue we had with data. And the data sets were a mess. And so our data operations team created a new database and a new approach. So I thought about what's the point I need to say? Well, it needs a full reset. And so I brainstormed a number of story ideas. I coached baseball for many years. Baseball is like cricket, but it's only played at 90 degrees instead of 360. And I thought about revamping a kid's swing. I thought about a home remodel, and I thought about a Rubik's Cube. You know Rubik's Cube? These little blocks that you have to spin. And I finally decided to go with the Rubik's Cube, and I simply said this. You know, there are two ways to solve a Rubik's Cube. One is to spin forever and to try to hope you come up with a solution. The second is you can do what my kids did, which is pull the blocks off and reset the entire thing. This is what we've done in our data operations scenario. We have taken a Rubik's Cube and reset the data and put it in and reset the blocks so that the entire data construct was redone. And that is an example of how I explained what they had done with the database. You see, I could have taken 10 minutes and explained all the different changes, but with a simple 15-second story, everyone had a clear idea of what my colleagues had done. Now, when you think about a story, a good story consists of three things: a point, content, and delivery. So I want you to think about this for a moment. I grew up in a very small town, and my first job was at McDonald's, ironically. I know I've seen the McDonald's in India. You have them too. But in my small little town, it's everybody kind of knew everybody. But things aren't always as they seem, because one night we were working at the restaurant and we noticed as I came into work that there was a car in the parking lot that we didn't recognize. None of the employees had the car. None of the customers had the car. And we're like, well, this is odd. And then we noticed after several hours that the car was still there. And so as kids, we decided to speculate as to why that car was there. And it's stolen. This is a stolen car. And yeah, it was not only stolen, but it was stolen by the mafia. That they've come up from Toledo, Ohio to destroy our way of life. But things aren't always as they seem, because the car was still there, and by the time it got to the end of the night, it was still sitting in the parking lot. And we thought, oh my gosh, we must have the stolen car in our parking lot. What are we going to do? We're going to call the police. So we called the Monroe County Sheriff, and we asked them what we should do. And they said, okay, boys, just stay at the restaurant. We'll send somebody out. So we close up the store, we lock it up, and we're waiting outside out in the country, because things aren't always as they seem. Well, after a couple of hours, we start to wonder, well, what if before the police come, the criminals come, the mafia? They come to re-get their store, and they get out the store, and they're going to, kill us, massacre us. And they'll be in the headlines in the stories, the Toledo Blade, small town kids killed by mafia, waiting for police to see stolen car. But things aren't always as they seem, because we realized we needed to find a hiding place. And just as we did, we saw in the distance car lights coming up. And we're like, oh my gosh, it's the police. Thank God we're saved. And then we realized as it got closer that it wasn't the police, it was a different car. And we're like, oh my gosh, we need to hide. And so we did. And so to our utter fear and terror, this car slowly began to move into the McDonald's parking lot. And it slowly came around, and it stopped right where we were hiding. And we're like, oh my word, we are doomed. Things aren't always as they seem. But to our utter relief, the car drove away and left. We think, thank God we've been saved. But then, just when we thought we were saved, to our utter fear, the car turned around and came along again. And this time it pulled into the parking lot, and it turned out its lights. By this point, we were absolutely terrified. And so the car slowly came around, and it came to where we were hiding, and then it stopped, and then it slowly began to roll down its window. And then I heard this voice, Jeff, are you there? It was my mother, who had woken up in the middle of the night and thought she would go find out why we weren't still at work and why we hadn't come home, because things aren't always as they seem. Now, when you think about that, what is the point of the story? Well, obviously, things aren't always as they seem. And we know many things that make bad stories, but what makes a good story is having a point. Now, you want to, when you tell a story in a business context and in the context of data science, you want to have a goal, one point for the story. You transition at the beginning, things aren't always as they seem, and you bring it home at the end. Because remember, your goal is very complicated ideas. And so you need to have your listeners understand something that they know, that you know, and they do not. Now, when you think about not just having a point, but content, then you want to think in terms of painting a picture. My daughter is an art teacher. And one time I took one of her classes, and she handed me this palette that had like 4 or 5 colors. And I'm like, well, there's thousands and millions of colors. She said, yeah, I know, but you can mix them from this. Now, when I paint a picture, think about what makes the difference between a picture and a photograph. If I took this picture and I took a picture of it, you would see seagulls, you would see people on the beach, you would see clouds and maybe airplanes overhead, you would see seashells and towels and sunscreen and surfboards and boats and maybe people swimming in the water and sharks eating the people swimming in the water. That's what you would see in a photograph. But if you paint the picture, You see, this picture leaves all those details out and focuses the attention only to the waves, the motion. Now, when you tell a story, what you leave out is more important than what you put in, because you're painting a picture with words. And so when I put together any kind of a story, even a quick one, you have 4 things to consider: characters, scene, plot, and tension. You see, Gustav Freytag, a professor in Germany in the 1800s, looked at all the great classics of literature. And he realized that there were some things in common that made something true. You start with an exposition, a once upon a time. There's a rising action that reaches a crisis or a climax. It's resolved, and then it closes, and it ends with what they call a denouement. He called it the story pyramid or story arc. All great stories follow this arc. And so in a story, you then put together and think through, what are my characters, my scene, my plot, and how am I rising and building the tension. The third thing, which we won't spend much time in because we're not really live and it's a lot better to do this live, is what makes a great story is delivery. And that is, you can use your voice. You can use it like an instrument where you vary pace, how fast you talk, pitch, volume. You have gestures, expression, and energy that you can use to engage the people. Friendly things to consider, especially where I'm from, where we do not enunciate, we tend to mumble. But let me close with this, and then we'll open it up, Giddy, for questions. Who do you want to be? What kind of a scientist, data scientist do you want to do? You want to be like Albert Einstein or Niels Bohr? Do you want it both equally brilliant, but in what you discover in your world of data? Do you want to have the ability to be one that people want to hear from, or the one that they say, oh man, it's so-and-so, he's going to bore me? I can tell you, as one who's done this business a long time, that I've seen presentation after presentation where people are hiding behind the podium, giving endless streams of calculus problems and statistical analysis, but not telling me the story of what the data really show. What should I do about it? Albert Einstein had the ability to tell a story through data. Niels Bohr did not. In fact, this was written 12 years ago. The chief economist of Google, Hal Varian, said this: the ability to take data, understand it, process it, and extract value from it, to visualize it, communicate it, that is going to be a hugely important skill in the next decades. And how right he was. And so I'll close with this. I'll take you back to that story I told at the very beginning. Remember, we're sitting in the car. I'm paging through the dictionary for my German-English phrases for my interrogation. My wife is sitting still. My friend Greg is frantically reaching through the back looking for his passport. My friend Linda is deep in prayer. And all of a sudden, Greg finds a piece of paper. He shakes it in my face, and he says, hey, Jeff, will this work? And I said, give me that. And I look at it, and it was a photocopy of his passport I had asked him to make in the JFK New York airport. And I said, I don't know, but let me see. And so I turned to the guard. I called him over. I handed him the piece of paper. He said, I don't know, but I'll try. After 20 minutes, that felt like 20 years, he came back. He said, just go. Just go. Go to the embassy. Get your friend his passport. And we went back. We went on our way. And I learned the value and the importance of communication. So with that, Giddy, I will stop. There are many other things I could say, but I'd rather give the class a chance, as you and I talked about, to engage with questions. And so I'll let you monitor that however you want. How do you guys want to handle that? And fire away.
Thanks, Jeff. You can either put it on the chat or you can ask the question. I'll go with the first one. The class is how do you build this muscle? How do you build this storytelling muscle? And given
how do I build what, Giddy?
The storytelling.
How do
muscle,
I build what?
Right? The storytelling muscle. The muscle.
How did I build it?
Yeah. So how would you're looking at this class is going to have another few months of courses and exercises during the courses and so on, and then they hit the road in terms of getting into their jobs. So how do you really help them build it?
Practice. If we were in a normal session, like if I were sitting in a room with you, and Giddy knows this because he's seen me do this in Chennai, I would actually give you the time to make a list of really good stories that you already have, good ideas. In fact, I did this a number of times in Chennai, and to this day, some of the most powerful and some of my favorite stories come from my time in Chennai. I heard once a story about a young gentleman told a story about how his parents made him go to somebody's house and he didn't know what was going on until they passed out snacks. And I turned to my friend Vasavi and I said to her, Vasavi, why is everybody laughing so hard about these snacks? And she goes, oh, that's because that means he's going to find his wife. And I'm like, really? Wow, that's so cool. And it was an incredible story that I'll never forget to this day. And so my point is, I would make a list of stories that you know, and then I would keep adding to them as you think of ideas. Then I would practice them. One of the biggest challenges I think data scientists have is they think that all the facts are so important they don't want to take time to explain them. I would err on the side. I had a meeting 2 days ago with the CIO, the Chief Information Officer of Ford Motor Company. Okay, big shot. And I was explaining a project I'm working on, and I started with just a picture. I'm building a command center, and I talked about, NASA and all of the guys that say go, no go, or gals about, logistics and so on, and what that would look and feel like. Because I felt like 30 seconds of painting a picture, even with the CIO, was going to be worth it to explain what it is I was trying to do. And so we just have to practice it, try it. Don't tell inappropriate stories. Don't tell stories that go on forever. Keep them short and practice. All right, next question.
There is some on the chat. You will see them.
Yeah, hold on. Let me check the chat here. All right. Tons of data and analysis. Sometimes you don't know where to start. I start with this. What is the problem I'm trying to explain? What's the big idea? What's the complicated concept I want to explain? Once I understand that, let's say you did a massive analysis and you concluded that you need to spend less money on television marketing and more on digital marketing. So that's my big idea. So what's the story? We're spending money the wrong way, right? So a false spend. So then I want to think about, well, how do I communicate that? That's a message nobody wants to hear, right? How do I communicate that? And so then I have to kind of find a match to a story that makes that point in a friendly way, and then keep it to, for business context, mostly 30 seconds if I can. So that's where I would start. Okay, from Shivam, though storytelling is great to convey a big idea, how does one go ahead and convey some level of details as well? Because it usually says devil is in the details. A great statement. So here's what I would say. It depends on my context. Most of the time, I want to convey, and I have a second session actually, where I talk about storytelling with pictures, where we talk about visualization strategy. And then it's a great session, but we talk about taking this idea story and figuring out how the visual can tell that story with the data in a PowerPoint, and not in PowerPoint, but in your dashboard or your visualization. And so what I want to think about is, in a presentation, who's my audience? What do they know or not know? Because if I'm going to, obviously on my team, I need to go through the details. I need to know what you're doing. I need to check their work. I need to make sure they're right? My reports. But when we go and meet with the CIO, with the chief data analytics officer, with my boss, with people like in marketing, other people that we're creating presentations for. They don't care about all those details. They want to know what to do. And so sometimes if I can share a little story, it raises the need and explains in more context how they're trying to, the complicated ideas of what we want them to do. They grasp a picture. And so you're right, you want to be careful to not just tell a story and then give no background data. The details I'll often put in the notes of my PowerPoint slides, and then that way they can read them if they want them. But I won't even in any presentation share a lot of detail because it bores the living daylights out of most people. I will just put them in the notes so people can go back and read them later. All right, other questions?
Hey Jeff, one question here. So
Sure.
So when you're telling a story, and you are there yourself physically to sort of talk someone through it, sure, that can put your point across. But there are also situations wherein, you just have to make some sort of like a deck, which is then floated around and you're not always there to present it. So how can you effectively tell a story through those visuals when you're not there to sort of, bring in an extra element of storytelling?
Yeah, boy, that is a tremendous question. Boy, I wish I had another 2 hours, Giddy, because I will walk you through. The key is going to be how you create your presentation. I'm going to give you a resource. What was your name?
Sukul.
Oh, Sukul. Okay, Sukul. I'm going to put in the chat here for everyone. This is a website that's run by Penn State University in State College, Pennsylvania. This guy is, I think, one of the best people of teaching you how to give technical presentations. I would look at this as a great resource. And in the case if it's going to get passed around, I would make sure that the details, the script per se, the details are in the notes section of your PowerPoint. But I'll give you that resource. I think it's one of the better resources I've seen on technical presentation, done by Professor Michael Olney at Penn State University. Okay?
Yep. Thank you. I'll definitely go through that.
My pleasure, Sukul. Any other questions here? All right, I guess we covered it, Giddy.
Yeah, we did. Anything else we can definitely send it to him. Yeah.
Yeah, reach out to me, and I wanna compliment your class here, Giddy, because I think about 6 of them already have joined me on LinkedIn even before the class started, maybe 8. So well done, and that shows the kind of good networkers that you guys are. That impressed me greatly, actually. So that you actually hunted me down, and you had no idea who I was. So I felt very flattered by that and complimented. So thank you, and I think it's credit to your program that you do. Again, the pleasure has been mine to meet with you guys. I apologize. I don't know why I couldn't get into the meeting for the longest time, but finally we made it work. I ended up having to join Zoom, and after I joined Zoom and did all their stuff, that let me in. So that's how they seem to be working now, I guess. So in any case, my apologies for that. Glad that we got the chance to meet. Giddy, thank you for the opportunity. And I wish all of you God's blessings and the best in your careers.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Pallavi?
Thank you, Jeff, for taking us through data storytelling and giving us a brief about what the skill really is about. We got a great overview of what it is, and we'll surely be digging deeper. It's probably going to transform the way we present from here on now. So it was a great session. We had fun. Your stories were super fun, and I had a good laugh in a couple of those too. So thank you for having such a nice, fresh session. Thank you, Giridhar sir, for facilitating the session, and really looking forward to getting to know more about data storytelling. Thank you, Team DARVIX, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. And the pleasure's been mine. I appreciate the opportunity. I wish you all a great time, and thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Jeff.
Bye.